It's the year 333 BC, and Alexander's Persian campaign is at its peak. Victory on the banks of the Granicus River was just the beginning. Persian King Darius III himself is leading an army of 100,000 men to punish the Macedonian invaders. Alexander's next great battle, near the ancient town of Issus, is just about to happen. It's the year 334 BC, shortly after the Battle of Granicus, which enabled Alexander to subordinate local Persian satraps and conquer Western Asia Minor. Despite the initial defeat, the Achaemenid Empire was still capable of pushing the invaders back to Europe quite easily. The Persian king Darius III, called Codomanus by the Greeks, was already in the process of assembling an army to suppress the Macedonian invasion. Alexander was aware that to move forward, he needed to eliminate the threat posed by the Persian fleet, which was the only power left in the area to offer any resistance. He had loyal, capable, and well-equipped soldiers, but the Macedonian navy was non-existent, so Alexander's next step was to attack the Persian ports of Ephesus, Miletus, and Halicarnassus in order to negate the power of the Persian fleet. Once that was achieved, Alexander headed north and east, taking over one city after another. There's a popular legend regarding his stay in Gordium, the ancient capital city of Phrygia. The famous Gordian knot was presumed to be unsolvable, and Alexander simply hacked it apart with his sword, fulfilling the prophecy that the one to untie the knot would become the king of Asia. But that is a legend, and we have to move forward with the story. While the Macedonian army camped near Tarsus, scouts reported that Darius was amassing a large army in Babylon. Alexander immediately divided his troops and sent his right hand, Parmenion, to occupy the lands around Issus in order to prevent any possible cooperation between Darius and his fleet. In early November of 333 BC, Alexander received reports that a large Persian army advanced into Syria and was camping east of the Amanus Mountains. So he departed Issus to reunite with Parmenion at the Assyrian gates. Darius knew that the Macedonians guarded the Balen Pass, so he chose a northern route into Cilicia through the Ammanian gates and captured Issus, where he killed wounded and sick Macedonian soldiers. Alexander was expecting Darius to come from the east, so he couldn't believe that the Persians were, in fact, to the north. On the other hand, the Persian king thought he had moved between two Macedonian armies, and didn't realize that Parmenion already rejoined Alexander. He departed the city to attack the presumed weaker half of the Macedonian troops, while Alexander decided to move back north to meet him, as he didn't want to leave formidable Persian forces behind when advancing to the inland of the Persian Empire. Soon, Darius realized that he was on the path to encounter the entire Macedonian army, but it was too late to turn back such a large formation, so he started to seek a good spot to deploy his units, and eventually decided to use the narrow coastal plain by the Panaris River. It wasn't a perfect site for the battle. A 1 or 2 kilometer wide plain was simply just not wide enough for Darius to deploy all of his troops in a single line. Another downside was that it offered limited space for cavalry maneuvers. The day was rainy, and the banks of the Panaris were slippery, giving a significant advantage for Persian infantry to withstand the expected push by the superior Macedonian phalanx, at least until the expected cavalry breakthrough on the beach. Darius put his mounted units on the beach, as it was the only place to offer enough space to charge and hopefully break Macedonian lines. The rest of his troops were formed in 2 lines on the center and left flank. It is worth mentioning that while Greek mercenaries made up a significant part of the Persian infantry, Darius also had the support of the famous Persian immortal units. In the early afternoon of November 5th, Alexander arrived on the battlefield to see the Persians already awaiting him. He deployed his troops in similar fashion as he did in the Battle of Granicus. The center of his battle line was formed by heavy infantry armed with long sarissa spikes, and some lighter units of Hypaspes and Peltas. Cavalry was placed on the far ends of both flanks, Thessalian units on the left, and the elite companion cavalry directly under Alexander on the right. Second in command Parmenion led the left flank. The battle was opened by the Persian cavalry, which crossed the river and charged at Parmenion's units, trying to overwhelm them. At the same time, the Macedonian phalanx moved forward to engage the enemy's center. Soon, they marched into range of the Persian archers and had to cross the river under heavy enemy fire. The sound of thousands of projectiles hitting the panoplies was horrible and devastating for morale. But at a time when many would have retreated, the Macedonian phalanx still pushed forward, their superior training and discipline paying off once again. While Alexander's heavy infantry tried to keep formation and disrupt the Persian center, he began the charge of his elite Heteroi cavalry, hoping to break through Darius's left flank. Heavy fighting began across the battlefield, with considerable losses on both sides. In the center, Greek mercenaries serving the Persian king pushed the Macedonians, exploiting their severed formation. Things were not going well on the left flank either, as Parmenion had a very hard time stopping the charges of the Persian cavalry. The Thessalians were tough and battle-hardened, but the Persian cavalry was twice as numerous and considered the best such unit in the ancient world. The companion cavalry, led by Alexander, hacked their way through the Persian infantry and managed to break a hole in their line. The Persian left flank slowly started to collapse. In fact, the devastating charge of Alexander's best mounted units was his only hope for victory, as he was outnumbered 2-1, and both his infantry in the center and cavalry on the left flank had trouble withstanding the push of the numerically superior Persian units. He could easily see how things went from his position on higher ground, and immediately decided to strike the side of the Persian center to aid his suffering phalanx troops. The impact of the charging cavalry was crushing, and the damage inflicted by the companions to the tightly packed enemy units allowed the Macedonian phalanx to push forward and annihilate the weakened Persian center. In the midst of the close combat struggle, Alexander spotted the Persian king and, together with his best soldiers, furiously charged at his unit. Darius realized that things were not going well and decided to retreat. While Alexander chased Darius, the majority of the companions rushed to the aid of the collapsing Macedonian forces at the beach. When Nebuchadnezzar, commander of the Persian cavalry, saw that Darius was retreating, he ordered his units to retreat as well, despite winning his flank quite easily. The Macedonians regrouped and pursued the running enemy, killing hundreds of them. The Persians were lucky that it was evening already, so Alexander's forces didn't pursue them for too long. The Persian king Darius fled, and his army was scattered. About 20,000 of his soldiers were killed that day by the Macedonian war machine. Losses on Alexander's side were also significant. Out of the initial number of 40,000 men, he lost about 7,000, mainly severed infantry units from the center. Darius was beaten for the first time, but the war was not over. He was an excellent organizer, able to use the resources of his vast empire wisely. But that is another story. The second great victory against the mighty Persian Empire enabled Alexander to cross into Syria and write another chapter of his stunning history as the greatest conqueror of antiquity.